Okay, Nation, the time has come. You know it's coming. You see it in the title of the video. For those of you who are new, this is the third time that I'm talking about this album. All three of them are available on this channel. One of them just under Metallica Saint Anger album review, and the other one is my 1 million view special thingy, something like that. So you might be wondering why I'm covering this album now for a third time. Why did I even do it a second time? Well, the first time was because it was my very first review whenever I was just Cover Killer. Secondly, I kind of did the same thing whenever I turned into coverkillernation. I polished it up a little bit and made it a little bit better because I wasn't 100% pleased with my initial run of it. But now, this third time is because of not only the Metallica discography that we're currently undertaking, but also because of an important birthday. Saint Anger turned 10 years old this year. And so the duty of this video is not only to talk about the album itself, but also to see whether or not this album in 10 years has really aged well. If it's aged at all, or if it's aged like spoiled milk. It's going to be a hard thing to do. This video is also going to be a little bit different. I'm going to do my best not to yell and scream and be ridiculous. Instead, I'm going to try to be constructive. I'm going to try to actually sit down and examine this and be analytical. So, if you're expecting me to scream and rage and do all of that because of Saint Anger for a third time, well, I guess you can go ahead and close out of this video. But I sure hope you don't. So Saint Anger was an album that was recorded and released in 2003. It wasn't recorded in 2003, it was up to 2003, and was released 5 days early than what it was originally intended to because of fears of peer-to-peer sharing. Metallica was already in the hotbed with Napster. Of course, Napster bad, blah blah blah. So they wanted to alleviate all of that and kind of deke everybody out. And I'm sure a lot of people wish that they would have P2P'd this as opposed to actually, purchasing it. But hey, whatever. That's a great support of a band. This is also an album that's marred by everything that sort of happened before it even started to be recorded. Jason Newsted left the band in 2001. The two songs that were on S&M, the symphonic live album, that were rumored to be a part of this album, whether Minus Human and No Leaf Clover, were not on the final cut. I Disappear, which was off of the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack, which sucked ass, was not on the final cut, thank God. That meant that this album had a chance. Jason Newsted was now gone, so yeah, things were not going very, very well, and then once they finally started to record, with Bob Rock on bass, by the way, then James decided to go into rehab for alcoholism and other abuses. So, already, they have just started tracking for this album. They just had started recording and brainstorming for this record, and it seems like just about everything that could possibly have gone wrong went wrong. It seemed as though everything that could happen to a band to really keep them from recording an album, really the universe saying to them that this album just isn't in the cards, well, it happened. Of course, this is Metallica, though. This is the band that rebounded from losing Cliff Burton. This is the band who rebounded after James nearly died in that pyrotechnic accident. So they're going to do it again, right? Yeah, they are. It's going to take them a while. And Saint Anger's the result. But let's talk about it. Saint Anger is an album that has been described by many different people as many different things. Now that might seem obvious, but it's been described as pure shit. It's been described as garage rock meets metal. It's been described as a just hot mess. And it's also been described as emotional genius. There's a lot of truth in all four of those statements, to be perfectly honest. It's not definitely one where one perhaps overshadows the other, though for some people's opinions that may be the case, but regardless, there's a certain element of truth in all four of those statements. Yes, this is pure shit at times. This is definitely one that is a hot mess. However, there is some emotional genius on this record, and it's definitely one that has the sound of garage rock meeting metal. And that was kind of the idea, that was kind of the point. Because of everything that had happened, because of everything that I had just described, losing Jason, having James go into alcoholism and in the rehab for alcoholism. Yes, he went into alcoholism. That had happened long ago. And only being available 4 hours a day. Yeah, only 4 hours every single day at the studio, 12 to 4. Because he had a lot of other stuff that he had to take care of through the program. And they really just wanted a raw sound with this. They didn't want to dilly-dally with a lot of crap. They didn't want to sit there and meticulously work at this one in the studio for 16 hours a day or anything like that. This is one where they wanted it to have that raw sound. They wanted it to have a just four guys jamming in a garage type of sound. And that was the sound that they kind of agreed on. That's what they wanted. The decision to have no guitar solos was not one that was immediately conceived right as they went in. It was something that they kind of, were aiming a little bit for, because they wanted this to be naturalized. They wanted this to be all centered around just four guys jamming and basically feeding off of everything. The one that probably fed off of this the most was probably James Hetfield, principally because he was also writing a lot of his emotional demons out on the paper. He was writing about a lot of things that perhaps caused him to go down the road of addiction. This is something that may have been very well prescribed by somebody in his program, that he write about all of these things and have it be the next Metallica Records lyric sheet. Reload and Reload didn't exactly have great lyrics, and well, as we learned on Saint Anger, its lyrics are not necessarily, dandies themselves. We're not going back to, the days of the Four Horsemen and Ride the Lightning and things like that. But instead, we're getting something that's very introspective, that's very self-aware. There's a lot of self-evaluation in these lyrics, and there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of rage, there's a lot of different emotions kind of caked up in there that really seem to span the entirety of James Hetfield's life, and it doesn't necessarily just involve himself. It also involves how he feels about other things, other people, other incorporations that surround him. So, lyrically speaking, this is one where, even though I would love to touch it, I can't touch it much. The one thing that I find to be a little bit distracting is the fact that some of the lyrics come off as a bit hokey, a bit silly, and I'm speaking more so directly to the title track on this record, Saint Anger, where it just doesn't seem to go anywhere. And that could be a brilliant metaphor for a lot of the songs on this album on a musical front. On a musical front, these songs feel way too long. They feel overpopulated by themselves, as opposed to being overpopulated by either good or bad ideas. They just seem to be, right there in each other's grills way too often, and it just, they drone on for far too long. Now, I understand there are drone bands out there. Drone is right there in the title. They play 7 notes, and the song is 20 minutes, and everyone hails them as genius. But why can't Metallica do that? Well, I'll tell you why Metallica can't do that. Metallica and drone metal are two completely different facets of the metal universe, two completely different elements of the metal universe. Drone, you might have 1,000 people that are really, really, deep into that. Let's say, a Sun album or, whatever. But with Metallica, you're talking about an audience of 2 million people. You're talking about 2 million people that know Metallica as a, bluesy, hard rock, heavy metal band or thrash metal band, all depending on which era that the fan happens to be from. So whenever you have these songs like this that are really just, bogged down by themselves, that seem to be just overinflated by their own egos, by the jam just extending too long and not going anywhere, almost like they just kept on running with the idea and then just didn't know where to go, then it really does have that feel of just kind of, you're traveling down a road only to realize that you're walking in a circle. Whether either that or, you walk down a really, really long cul-de-sac, and then every single song you just realize, shit, I just have to turn around and go back, and then you turn around and go back, and fuck, it's another cul-de-sac. Yeah, it's kind of a weird paradox. How the hell did you get there in the first place? Well, I guess it's because you're walking. There are some things on this album that are good. I do enjoy the fact that James did a little bit of self-searching, a little bit of self-reflection. Some of the lyrics are not all of that terrible. They are definitely an improvement from Load and Reload, Road and Reroad, Scooby-Doo edition. However, it still is not something that I can say too much about. I also like the fact that even though I just really dissed a lot of the songwriting on this album and really kind of spoke to why it's a negative, I like the idea in general, kind of like with S&M, I like the idea of a symphony playing with a metal band. I like the idea of heavy metal going back to the garage and just jamming out almost like they're making their very first demo tape. The only thing is it's being handled by a large label, blah, blah, blah. The execution is really the flaw here, and that's where it really seems to, the wheels just seem to fall off on this one 100% completely and then some. It just seems like this album is over-exasperated by itself, and it goes nowhere. There are some good songs on this album. Frantic as an album opener is not a terrible song. It is basically, four guys jamming in a garage, fuel. That's essentially what it is. You know, give me fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire. Ooh, frantic, tick, 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 tock. You're looking at essentially the same thing, only in a different format. So, and because of that, it's definitely a song that a lot more people are willing to be accepting towards. Saint Anger, on the other hand, not at all. This was the lead single. I remember this like it was yesterday, principally because I'm pretty sure it stayed on the radio for about 2 days. They played the shit out of it for a week, roughly, and then you never heard it again. And that's actually a fitting metaphor for what happened after the Saint Anger tours. After the Saint Anger tours, you didn't hear much of anything from Saint Anger whenever they toured. You would hear a song here and there between 2009 and 2011, but aside from that, it's almost like they themselves have forgotten about this album. This album that they were speaking so highly of, that Lars was defending his infamous snareless tone, or snare tone, really very vehemently. And yet they barely play this on tour 100% whatsoever. Now, the whole lacking of solos thing, this is something that draws a lot of critique, but as they themselves stated, with the whole jam atmosphere, a solo would require an overdub unless Kurt just came up with something on the spot, which, well, wasn't exactly going to be easy. He wanted to tailor-make something like that. You can't exactly just have a fantastic solo, you know, just free and simple. The guy's not Joe Bonamassa. He's not, you know, Steve Vai or anything like that. Yeah, sure, he took some, you know, he took lessons and was taught by a classic guitar man, but it's just not always in the cards, especially whenever it comes to the environment that they are in. Not taking anything away from Kirk Hammett, however, it's just something that would require a little bit more in the way of expert, you know, production magistry, which is something that they really didn't want to do. It's something they didn't want to avoid. Bob Rock didn't even want to, you know, do any sort of vocal toning or anything like that. He wanted James Hetfield to sound pure. He wanted all of those emotions to really strew out of him, and that's the reason why we get these random just yelps that just sound completely off key and off base. James Hetfield just makes these noises kind of summon up from the depths of his stomach, and you're just scared for him. You think that something's going to happen. You think maybe someone just ran up to him and punched him square in the nuts, and that's what happened. It isn't what happened. But that's the reason why those yelps are there and why they haven't been fine-tuned or anything like that. This is an album that's all about the dirty production. It doesn't help it very much, but you can kind of understand that the dirty production is present because of what they were going for. They were going for the four guys in the garage approach, as I keep repeating. Now, let's talk about Verdict. Let's talk about overall 100%. We've discussed good, we've discussed bad. Let's talk about Verdict. Saint Anger is still an infamous album. It's still an album that, as far as Metallica's discography is concerned, is the weak point. It is the weakest link. Goodbye. The only one that could potentially touch it is Lulu. And it's hard to do that because with this is at least a pure Metallica abomination as opposed to a Lou Reed Metallica abomination. And Bob Rock had nothing to do with that one, so he's out of the picture. Can't blame him. So yeah, this album is still a gigantic hunk of bullshit 10 years later. But, that hunk, that gigantic hunk, had shrunk a whole hell of a lot. See, here's the last thing that I wanted to talk about. How has it aged in 10 years? It's a lot more tolerable now than it was whenever it came out. Think about 10 years ago, what was happening in music that wasn't Metallica. Nu metal was still kind of on its outskirts, and we were about to enter the emo age. Think of the bands that were around in 2003. Now think about the bands that are here in 2013. And I'm not talking about your favorite bands, the ones that are underground, the ones that are pushing to move some dirt and get themselves out into the open air. I'm talking about the ones that everybody's talking about. Bands that you yourself may have liked 10 years ago, simply because we all got caught up in the scene. Except if you're true and cult, you know? 10 years later, Saint Anger sounds a whole hell of a lot better than an Asking Alexandria record. It sounds a whole hell of a lot better than any Blood on the Dance Floor song I've ever heard. And really, for a lot of the stuff that's been popular throughout the past 10 years, Saint Anger's not bad. It sure isn't. It's an improvement. My feelings toward the album still are that it's a gigantic heap of flying goat shit, but this is at least a gigantic flying heaping pile of goat shit that, well, I'd be willing to allow it to hit me in the face every so often. Some of those other bands, some of this other stuff that's out there today, I would duck every time. I would do everything in my power to knock that shit away. I'd get a baseball bat and go Barry Bonds on that shit. With Saint Anger, 10 years later, Sucks. Still, doesn't suck as bad. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, as far as Metallica's discography is concerned, Saint Anger hasn't aged well. Probably hasn't really aged at all. But compared to the musical landscape of 10 years ago to today, Saint Anger has aged and matured very nicely. Almost like a fine wine. Something that you wouldn't drink within the first month or so. But now, 10 years later, you're willing to give it another shot. And it actually doesn't taste like shit. In fact, it kind of tastes good.